Hello and welcome to D-Dubs Plays. I am back. It has been a while since I last made a video and I want to take a moment to address that before we get into the meat of this video. So last year I was juggling my full-time job, my family responsibilities and trying to make a video every week, and I was feeling pretty burnt out. I also tried diving into some new games like Starfield. I recorded a ton of footage, but it was so different to the usual content style that I was used to. I was really struggling to figure out how to turn it into a decent video. But I thought everything's going to be fine. City Skylines 2 is coming out. I've got a plan. I'm going to start a new series, making content that I know how to make, and all will be well. But it didn't work out like that. City Skylines 2 didn't live up to my expectations at all. I played about 10 or 20 hours before I realised this just wasn't going to work. So I took a step back. Started playing games just for the fun of playing games again, and just took some time to really think about the direction I want to take the channel. So I've decided that moving forward I want to focus on just creating content that I'm really enjoying making. I don't want the pressure of deadlines, so there will be more content coming, but it's not going to be a video every week like before. And I've decided to try a few new things, so there's going to be more standalone videos where I share my thoughts on the games that I'm currently enjoying, or like this one where I'm going to share my views on some interesting gaming stories that have caught my eye recently and my views on them. So thank you for your patience, and I'm excited to share this new direction with all of you. One more thing quickly before we get into it. I wasn't sure what footage to put to this video, so I'm just playing a bit of Tiny Glade in the background whilst I talk. I am planning to do a video on this game soon, so look out for that if you're interested. Now let's get into the topic for today. So I've been reflecting on some recent stories in the gaming news that really highlight a concerning and ongoing trend. Big developers seem to be losing touch with actual gamers. For example, Tim Sweeney mentioned that the industry is undergoing a generational shift towards the metaverse, while Emil Pagliarulo, I probably pronounced that wrong, touted Starfield as the biggest, richest space simulation RPG anyone could imagine. And then there's Ubisoft. Well, yeah, there's a lot of Ubisoft. It feels like there's a growing trend of AAA games that fail to meet expectations, and the statements from many of these development teams only reinforce the core issue. It seems that developers have forgotten who their audience is, or at least what their audience wants. So in a moment I'm going to dive into this a bit more and explore what's going on in the industry. But before I go any further, there is an elephant in the room that I need to address. Whenever the topic of developers being out of touch with gamers comes up, identity politics often becomes part of the conversation. Now that's not a topic that I really want to dive into at all, to be honest, but I feel it is important to clarify my stance before we move on. I think as gamers we are a diverse group, and I wholeheartedly support games being inclusive. I often hear people complaining about features like pronoun options in character creators, and I honestly don't understand why that's a point of contention. If you prefer not to use that option, that's fine, just don't use it. It's there for the people that do want to use it, and that shouldn't be a problem. That said, I also recognise that there are times when it seems like identity politics is shoehorned into games in a way that feels forced, when it appears to be more about making a statement than genuinely enhancing inclusivity, and I do understand why that's frustrating to people. It's a delicate balance, and I think there are definitely times when developers need to consider a bit more how they navigate that landscape a bit more thoughtfully. However, it's crucial to recognise that identity politics is often misused by both sides on the debate. Some gamers resort to labelling a game as bad due to what they perceive as a woke ideology, sidestepping the more nuanced reasons that a game might not resonate with them. On the flip side, developers sometimes dismiss valid criticism by branding dissenters as part of a vocal anti-woke minority, even when the concerns raised have nothing to do with identity politics. The tendency can be unhelpful and distracts from addressing the real issues that are plaguing the industry, which is why I've been hesitant to dive into that topic at all. But now that that's done, I want to explore those issues as we dive into the headlines I mentioned, starting with Tim Sweeney's assertion that the gaming industry is facing a generational shift. He suggests that single-player games are on the decline. Sweeney points to the recent string of big-budget flops as evidence, arguing that they haven't made any money. Now sure, Epic has enjoyed massive success with Fortnite, and it's understandable that they'd want that magic across all of their titles, but the reality is that narrative doesn't hold up. If single-player games are truly dying, then how do we explain the phenomenal success of titles like Baldur's Gate or Elden Ring, Black Myth Wukong? Clearly there's a significant market for engaging single-player experiences. The real issue with many of these recent flops is that they simply weren't engaging single-player experiences. And let's not forget, one of the most expensive flops recently wasn't even a single-player game. It was PlayStation's Concord. They invested a staggering $400 million into this live service game, only to pull the plug just 2 weeks after launch because nobody wanted to play it. It's exactly the kind of game that Tim claims gamers are looking for, but let's face it, a poorly executed live service game won't succeed any better than a bad single-player title. Look at Skull and Bones, touted as the first quadruple A game, but barely staying afloat. Look, there are good live service games, and they do generate revenue, a lot of revenue. But the player base is finite. Most of those players are already committed to existing successful titles, and if developers want a slice of that pie, they need to create games that are as good, if not better, than what's already out there. And there will always be gamers who lack the time, the money, or the desire to invest in a live service game. The market for single-player experiences isn't going anywhere. Now, Epic aren't the only developers that seem to have a distorted view of reality. Let's look at Starfield and its recent expansion, Shattered Space, for example. Both have faced pretty lukewarm reception from players, but Emil Pagliarulo recently said, and I quote, "In a lot of ways, Starfield is the best game we've ever made." Now, I thought Starfield was okay, not great, just okay. But the best thing Bethesda has ever made? Seriously? Now, he qualified it with "in a lot of ways," so maybe he's referring to the technical aspect, but then he goes on to say, Bethesda succeeded in making the biggest, richest space simulation RPG anyone could imagine. Big, yes. Rich, not so much. I saw the phrase mile wide, inch deep pop up quite frequently in discussions. Some even labelled it a menu simulator. Honestly, compare it to other games, the Mass Effect trilogy, games that are over a decade old now. You can't argue that Starfield offers a richer experience. They also led us to believe that Shattered Space would be on par with Far Harbor, which many consider their best expansion ever. Emil claims they really understand how to do expansions, but gamers have a different take. Shattered Space feels like little more than content that was inexplicably cut from the base game. Bethesda, it seems, are quite content to live in a fantasy world where Starfield is a phenomenal success and all the evidence to the contrary can be happily ignored. Contrast that with CDPR, who also had a game that disappointed fans at release with Cyberpunk 2077. Their response was to hold their hands up and say, yes, mistakes were made. This is what we plan to do about it. They listened to their customers and they acted on the feedback, and Cyberpunk became a true redemption story. It's the kind of redemption story that simply isn't possible when your response to criticism is to bury your head in the sand. Oh, and speaking of Cyberpunk 2077, keep an eye out for an upcoming video about it on the channel soon. I'm already making it and I think it's going to be an exciting addition to the content lineup. But I'm getting sidetracked. These stories really illustrate the growing disconnect between developer expectations and player experiences. And nowhere is this more evident than with Ubisoft. This once respected studio seems to find itself in the news constantly, but unfortunately it's for all the wrong reasons. Recently we had the open letter from minority shareholder AJ Investments, which called for a change in leadership and pointed to the declining reputation, among other things. That's alongside a string of cancelled games, disappointing releases and delays. They've resorted to every unpopular cash grab imaginable, paid early access, season passes, the lot. And now I hear they're planning 10 Assassin's Creed releases over the next 5 years. That hardly instills confidence in the quality we can expect. All of this unfolds against a backdrop of plummeting share prices and rumours that Tencent may be looking to take the company private. So why can't they seem to catch a break? Well, when we examine some of their recent statements, the disconnect becomes painfully clear. Take their latest game, Star Wars Outlaws, which I was genuinely excited about until I started seeing player feedback. Gamers are calling the game shallow and repetitive with poor level design, especially in the stealth sections. The character animations feel wooden, and there were numerous bugs at launch. While Ubisoft acknowledges that sales were disappointing, they emphasise that critics seemed to enjoy it, and they blamed gamers for having unrealistic expectations. I hate to break it to them, but the critics aren't the ones buying the game. Of course, the gamers aren't buying it either, but that's not entirely surprising. I used to eagerly await a new release from Ubisoft, but now I find myself thinking maybe I'll check it out in a few months if there's a good discount. This is a studio that once produced innovative games loved by many, but now they've become little more than a mediocrity factory, churning out bland titles while seemingly oblivious to why gamers have lost interest. These stories highlight a troubling trend in the gaming industry where big studios seem to lose sight of who they're actually making games for. It feels like they're chasing trends, trying to please shareholders, bringing in new management that doesn't truly understand the gamer experience. And when it comes to our expectations, we'll ignore the fact that plenty of studios are able to meet them, but it's not unreasonable for us to want finished products. In any other industry, that would be a given. We don't want to feel like we're paying to enjoy a game that's still in development. Or worse, shell out extra money for a few days of early access only to find that it's going to be a lot more than a few days before the game is ready. Our expectations are not unrealistic at all. They're pretty simple, in fact. What we really want is a worthwhile experience. Games that are deep, engaging, tell compelling stories. Just like in Hollywood, a big budget and flashy graphics can't save a game that lacks a solid foundation. The focus should shift away from making things bigger and prettier to making them more fun and engaging. Gamers crave immersive worlds that invite exploration and emotional investment. However, developers often turn exploration into a soulless checklist exercise, filling vast landscapes with repetitive tasks that feel more like chores than adventures. We want characters with depth, whose journeys resonate with us, and narratives that challenge our perspectives. But too often we get generic characters and sanitized narratives that aim to please everyone and yet end up appealing to no one. Instead of meaningful gameplay, many games prioritize superficial features that distract from the core experience rather than enhance it. When studios chase trends or focus on spectacle without substance, they risk alienating the audience. The real challenge studios need to tackle is creating experiences that prioritize player engagement and storytelling, rather than just trying to outdo each other in terms of graphics and scale. But to truly reconnect with the audience, there needs to be an open and honest dialogue between gamers and developers. However, this is often complicated by the toxicity that can arise in gaming communities. While it is understandable that frustrations run high, especially when players feel let down, it's essential to remember that many of the talented individuals working on these games have little creative control. The decisions are made at the top. They're often doing their best to create engaging experience, and venting frustrations towards them can hinder the very dialogue needed for improvement. That said, if the people that do have creative control start taking the criticism constructively and act on it appropriately, instead of making excuses and casting blame, it is possible to find some redemption. As I mentioned earlier, Cyberpunk 2077 is a perfect example of how this can work when approached in the right way. Look, many commentators are portraying Ubisoft as being on the brink of collapse right now. While I don't think it's quite that dire, their financial struggles are hard to ignore, especially with the impending release of Assassin's Creed Shadows. The delays and the surrounding skepticism and controversy certainly don't paint a promising picture. So let's entertain the idea for a moment that it really is that bad. It's tough to think about the potential downfall of a studio that's given us so many beloved franchises over the years. I'd be genuinely sad to see them go. However, if the worst were to happen, it could serve as a wake-up call for the industry. No one is too big to fail, and ignoring your customers' feedback can have serious consequences. That said, there are still plenty of studios out there creating great games. I mentioned a few examples earlier. These days it's easier than ever for smaller studios and indie developers to have an impact on the market. Gaming isn't going anywhere, in fact it's thriving. But the big studios that have long been at the top should be concerned about their current precarious positions. Gamers have options, and they're starting to vote with their wallets. It's high time these studios listen to their audience before it's too late. Well, I'm going to leave it there, and I hope you enjoyed my little rant. This video was a big departure from my previous content, so I'd love to hear your thoughts. Would you like to see more videos like this? Maybe you've got a suggestion for a topic I could cover in a future video. Drop your feedback in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, feel free to hit the like and subscribe buttons. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.